and that's part of the problem as well.
Thank you very much, Scott Faulkner, for joining us. Now we have a breaking news. An Iranian ballistic missile struck an apartment building in Beersheba, killing 3 people and injuring several others, according to the Israel Fire and Rescue Center. Israeli Emergency Service MDA has also confirmed the death toll. This is the first reported death in Israel since Trump announced ceasefire. Now we are joined by guest Irina Zuckerman. She's senior journalist live from New York. Irina, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. What is your take on the ceasefire situation, since Iran has also attacked and Israel has also maybe Israel will attack, we don't know that yet, but Iran has definitely attacked. What's the situation like? What are we expecting in the next 24 hours, according to you?
Question. First of all, the ceasefire was supposed to start 6 hours from the time of the announcement, but apparently came as a surprise, particularly to Israel, which was not consulted about the arrangements, and particularly after Iran had already sent a ballistic missile that seemed that gave room and time for continued hostilities. Now it seems that the ceasefire, which was not conclusively agreed on, was violated. Iran appeared to accept the ceasefire, but that statement was articulated only by a spokesman, not by anyone from the senior leadership. So it's not clear whether Iran ever fully committed. As of now, it does not seem to be an active ceasefire, and it seems likely that Israel will retaliate, particularly if there's an expectation of continued attacks on civilian targets. This is a very different situation from the retaliatory attacks on U.S. bases in Qatar, which were coordinated, prearranged, where the base was fully evacuated and where no one was hurt. This is a very different situation where there was a deadly incident.
Irina, I would like to press you on the fact that Trump already announced, regardless of what Israel officials confirmed or Iranian officials confirmed, why would President Trump announce a ceasefire if Iran had not agreed fully? Was this a tactical move to shape the narrative, according to you?
Trump was definitely trying to pressure both parties to come to a conclusion, because as far as Trump is concerned, the objectives of the escalation were met. U.S. had carried out its threat to use military force if Trump did not come to the negotiation table within 60 days from his initial announcement, which is exactly what happened. Israel carried out very significant attacks on various military targets in Iran and decapitated a lot of the military leadership. Also, Trump believes, rightly or wrongly, that the nuclear program by Iran has been completely destroyed. That is quite in question by many analysts, and those questions are only growing. But Trump believes that the matter is finished, and so he's acting as if it is, regardless of the intent of the other parties in the conflict.
According to you, could this disputed ceasefire statement actually derail or have any effect in the current situation?
Well, because it did not appear to be coordinated with either of the parties, it seems very doubtful that it would go exactly as planned, particularly since there was no clear high-level commitment from any party. Israel's reaction was to say that this announcement came to them as a shock, which is not the same as agreeing to its terms, particularly if Iran continued to attack. Israel had previously stated that they reserved the right to retaliate and to defend themselves from any acts of aggression.
And how do you interpret the earlier news from U.S. that after the final missions are completed. What do you think they were indicating towards when they said final missions before a ceasefire? Is this just war continued by other means, according to you?
From what I understand, US has been assisting Israel with cyber attacks inside Iran, which also could contribute to the damage of the military or nuclear infrastructure, in addition to the physical airstrikes. So as far as the US is concerned, the major targets have already been penetrated, and some of these objectives were achieved. However, what US considers mission accomplished is not necessarily the way Israel looks at it. It is true that many military sites have been destroyed, and many military leaders and political actors have been taken out. However, given the fact that Iran has continued to successfully barrage Israel with missiles and drones for the past 2 weeks, it seems that not everything has been destroyed. Clearly, Iran still has a sufficient arsenal of weapons to attack Israel, and the launch sites have not all been identified and disabled. So as far as Israel is concerned, they probably view it as necessary to ensure that Iran is in no position to continue attacks on civilians.
And how is this situation being framed by your local US media?
The media is as surprised as anybody by Trump's statement, given that there was absolutely no discussion of that matter. It was expected that Israel would probably bring the matter to a close within a couple of weeks from the beginning, based on the strategic objectives and based on the effectiveness of the operation. However, given that Iran had continued to attack Israel this entire time, and there has been no commitment from Iran to put an end to those attacks, it was doubtful that it would end as soon as was initially considered. There was some expectation that Iran would at some point return to the table humbled by the success of the military operation, but instead the regime has thus far doubled down and had refused to admit any sort of defeat.
Irina, thank you very much. You will stay with us. We have a breaking news. The Israeli Defense Forces have now shared latest visuals from their attack on western Iran. In a statement, the IDF has stated, over the past few hours, IAF fighter jets directed by precise IDF intelligence carried out a series of strikes in western Iran on targets including underground military infrastructure used by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for storing missiles and missile launchers. Earlier today, IAF fighter jets also struck and destroyed a missile launcher intended for use against IAF aircraft. Now we go back to our discussion with Irina Tsukarman. Irina, thank you for staying with us. What is your take again on this situation? And now that we've seen Israel has struck back Iran from the visuals that have just come in, do you think that there is still a chance of ceasefire, and the weight that this ceasefire that was issued in Trump's Truth Social has any value or effect in this current moment?
Well, it seems like this attack has started hours earlier, before the most recent events, and as I mentioned, it wasn't simply a retaliation. Israel still needed to clean up and ensure that launch sites could not be used against new attacks. What happens next depends on whether there is any practical value to carrying on operations, whether there are any more attacks likely being planned, and whether there are any more capacity by Iran to launch these attacks. So far, Iran has not made any statements disavowing any future physical action or calling for unconditional bilateral ceasefire. On the contrary, evidence points to the fact that Iran may continue to launch these attacks at civilians. For that reason, what we're seeing is practical necessity and not just messaging, strategic messaging by Israel. And we may assume that if there are any more new attacks coming in, Israel will need to try to prevent it, and not simply respond to what has already happened.
And Irina, do you see any signs that Iraqi and Qatari leaders are pushing more than ever that U.S. Should maybe broker a ceasefire, and they don't want to be used as a place for theater for Iran-U.S. conflict?
Well, Iraq has essentially sided with Iran, publicly at least. The Baghdad government would not join the hostilities directly, but its political support for Iran speaks volumes. In the meantime, inside Iraq, there was a proxy drone attack that struck one of the bases there, which in itself sends a message from Iran's allies that they too are ready to join the fray if anything goes wrong. As for Qatar, they have tried to capitalize on the situation to achieve a quick victory, and in fact, if nothing else, Trump's statements benefited them the most. Trump credited Qatar with negotiating the alleged ceasefire, which Israel says it has no knowledge of. So, for all we know, the entire stunt was a PR move to advance Doha's interest in taking credit for regional mediation.
And do you think, is there any fear in the region, especially Middle East, that state actors may pause in the non-state while the non-state actors will carry these attacks?
It's entirely possible, depending on how much Israel has degraded Iran's own capacity and how far the regime is willing to go to save face, and whether it actually has the backing of the proxy sufficient to carry on these sorts of attacks. So far, Iran has made a lot of threats. It has threatened to close down completely the Strait of Hormuz. That has yet to happen, and hopefully it will not. Perhaps Iran was bluffing with the hope of putting psychological pressure on its adversaries with the idea of economic impact from such a measure. It has also threatened physical terrorist attacks and proxy attacks, but so far none of its proxies have physically joined or assisted Iran in time of need, including by potentially encircling Israel. Hezbollah has been significantly weakened and is probably in no hurry to put itself in further danger after the devastating blow it has suffered at Israel's hands. Hamas is still entrenched in a protracted battle in Gaza, but physically unable to move out of the regional vicinity. Houthis have continued their attacks throughout this war, but they are located far away, and so they have limited effectiveness by definition. And Iraqi militias did send a signal earlier today, but they too are not particularly willing to risk themselves if Iran is not fighting back with full force, which it isn't, because it has no air defense to speak of at this point.
Thank you very much, Irina Zuckerman, for joining us and bringing your expertise as senior journalist all the way from New York. Now we have a breaking news. Israeli military issues another warning of incoming missiles from Iran. This is the fifth alert since Trump announced ceasefire, as per reports. In another attack, Israeli emergency services have said that 3 people were killed and 2 wounded in an Iranian missile strike in southern Israel.